Confessing.
Like they sat face to leaf with a plant
And had confession?
and like confessed their sins.
No, I haven't heard about this. Was there a reason?
Reason why they did it?
Yeah.
Here, let me read the tweet. Okay. Today in chapel, we confessed to plants. Together we held our grief, joy, regret, hope, guilt, and sorrow in prayer, offering them to the beings who sustain us, whose gift we too often fail to honor. What do you confess to the plants in your life? That was the tweet. And the irony is that they're talking about the plants that sustain us and confessing to them, but don't confess to the God that sustains us.
Welcome back to the Christ in Culture. This is Gordon.
And Clint.
And how you doing, Clint?
To be honest, so I feel like a lot of times on here we say like, oh yeah, we're doing great. This has been a rough week. I've reached out to you multiple times for prayers, which has been awesome, so thank you. But yeah, it's just been super chaotic. A lot of stuff coming together at work at the same time. And then I texted you last night late because with all the storms we've been getting, it actually leaked through my apartment wall and soaked the wall, or the lower part of the wall, the carpet in one of the corners, and then my dresser and bookshelves, because they're made of wood, they soaked up the water, and now they're like falling apart because they're like compost board, you know?
Yeah.
Not compost board, but compact board.
Kind of like, bulletin boards.
Yeah. And so it fell apart. So now all the legs on my furniture in my bedroom are like destroyed. So it's been kind of a rough week, to be honest. So
yeah, that's
prayers would be appreciated. But yeah, I think things will start getting better next week. Work's going to start calming down a little bit, and hopefully my room's not torn up and I have carpet again by then. So we'll see. But yeah, how about you?
I am pretty tired. Just because you already know this because we've been talking, but I just spent all day bottling beer. Yeah. Which is really not a bad gig. It's just a very tedious gig. Mm-hmm. It took like 5 hours to bottle 10 gallons of beer. Usually me and Steve do it together, and so it's like a little easier with like a team and like a Ford conveyor belt system type thing going on, you know?
But he's got the gala going.
Yeah, so he's really busy, and so it's the first time soloing it, but it was good. And then I've also just been going since, well, I guess since the storm, because I would have been going through the storm, but the storm canceled a lot of things. But like Saturday we had a retreat, then I had mass talks and tables on Sunday, and then yesterday me and Lizzie woke up early and went and saw Downton Abbey.
Oh yeah, you've been waiting for that for a long time.
I've been waiting.
Was it everything you wanted?
It was everything. Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful.
It
That's
was
so good.
Just a nice little package.
Nice. And last I remember, you were like wrapping up the second to last or final season, and you're trying to figure out like who survived and stuff. Did you manage to not have any spoilers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no spoilers. That's as
good.
Far as going into it. I mean, they wrapped up the season. Like, they could have not come out with a movie.
Sure.
Okay. It would have been fine.
Yeah.
But the movie was just like a nice touch. I had like a lot of questions in the last episode. Like, you know, yes, that was good, but like, does this person get together?
Like, what could have happened?
Just like small things. Like, they hinted at like, oh, they like each other, but like, well, do they get together?
Mm-hmm.
And so those things were like completed. And I was like, nice.
Cool.
It was really funny too because we saw it at 9:40. It's like early bird special, and we were like the youngest people there by like a long shot.
For real?
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense. 'Cause everyone else is like at work and stuff.
Everyone's at work, and so everyone else were like in their 60s, like parents taking their parents, but those parents taking their parents were also like already in their like 58 taking their parent.
Holy cow.
And so it was just great because the guy next to me, he'd had to be like in his late 70s or more, just judging by looks, and
he's actually just 20 and just didn't age well.
Like, he didn't do much throughout the most movie, but there was like one part where what's her name? She's from Harry Potter.
Oh, McGonagall.
Something Smith.
Margaret
Smith.
Maggie
Smith.
Yeah,
Yes.
Margaret, but goes
Maggie
by
Smith. She's very like witty and like sassy, and she says something to someone, and he just like loses it, and that made me lose it. It was really funny.
She's like the matriarch of the house, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, she's the mother of the heir of Downton.
Gotcha. I'm gonna be honest. I watched 3 episodes a couple years ago, and I couldn't keep.
She's the best of everything. But yeah, it was really good. It was nice.
Cool.
British, no like sad ending. Everything's all nice and neat and proper.
Yeah. Cool. Other than that, do you have any current media? Any new stuff you're taking in?
It was the biggest one. Lizzie and I've been having her catch up on The Good Place. Because season 3 came out, and I only watched season 1 originally. So I saw season 2, then rewatched 1 through 2 with her. Mm-hmm. And we haven't started season 3 yet. So we've been watching that. As well as before that, we started this show, but we didn't continue it yet. But I want to. It's called Forever. It's with, I don't know his name.
I don't think I've even heard of it.
It's on Amazon Prime.
Oh, that's probably why.
And it's 2 like comedians. Like one of them's like Documentary Now on Netflix, and some other like they're both from SNL originally back in the day.
Okay. And
it's essentially they're married and they like love each other a lot, and you can tell they're perfect for each other because they're like really weird in small ways, but they're just in the motions of marriage,
mm-hmm.
And so they go to change something up, and he ends up dying.
Oh, wow.
And then you think like that, like the next episode's her, and then she ends up dying, and then they are living in heaven together, or they're living somewhere in the afterlife together forever. Pretty much they're like in their normal clothes in a normal house, and she's like, how long is this gonna be like this? He's like, I don't know. And that's as far as we got. It's like episode 3 of like 10, and so I don't know what happens.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I've definitely not heard of that one.
It was interesting.
But I eventually have to get Amazon Prime so I can watch the Lord of the Rings movie, which they announced is going to be in New Zealand again, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
Yeah, so nice little nod. I think New Zealand can like officially take that title. Like when the Hobbit movies came out, which were not great, and I'm not endorsing them. When those came out, the Air New Zealand painted their jets to look like smog and like different characters and stuff. New Zealand is like so much behind like supporting like all this stuff, which makes sense because it boosts their economy and stuff. So anything else?
No.
Okay.
What about you?
Let's see. I'm trying to think. So during that storm, there was a day where like they closed our parish office. So I was just like stuck at home. So I've been reading and finishing Letter to a Suffering Church. So we've talked about that a couple times. It's super easy to read. I don't know why it's taking me this long. It's more of just like I pick it up, read a couple pages, and then put it back down. So I finished that.
Leave it on the toilet. And then every time you take a dump, you'd probably get through like 5 pages.
That's true. I'm never at home. That's part of it too. It's been kind of a crazy couple weeks. So, but I did finish it now. So very, very good. If you haven't read it yet, it's free. You just have to pay for shipping. Or if you go to a church that is handing them out, like Gordon did, then you can get them for free.
Happenstance. I never go to that church.
Yeah. So they're super easy to find, and it's very, very good. So I would check that out. And then the other thing I did while I was stuck inside all day is I think I mentioned on the last episode how I had been watching Yu-Gi-Oh, the anime TV show. So I just like watched a ton of Yu-Gi-Oh that day. And actually it pulled out, like I went in my closet and went through like my boxes that I haven't opened since like I moved here basically. Found my old Game Boy from when I was younger, pulled it out, and I played some of the Yu-Gi-Oh games too and actually beat one of them. So that was pretty fun. To be honest, that's basically it, other than like just music on the radio and stuff, but there's nothing that really stood out from the music I've been listening to. So
that's fair. Yeah. I've been like catching foxes lately. Just because I've been so behind on podcasts for some reason, but now I'm pretty much caught up. And there's the ones I was the most behind on. I was like 6 episodes behind.
Okay.
I listened to like 6 in like a week and a half.
Yeah. I just finished their newest episode today.
So good.
What's the Roman Circus pod? Yeah. So, man, I've been crushing that. I think in the last couple of weeks, I'm on like episode 40 or something like that. Like, I'm just going through. So, starting from the beginning. But we've talked about that a couple of times. So, I'm not going to bore you guys with the details there. But speaking of what I started watching a couple weeks ago. This was like, a month ago that I watched this now? A couple weeks ago. Our topic for today. I've mentioned it as part of my current media a while back, but the Netflix series Chernobyl.
Netflix?
Yeah.
It's on Netflix?
No, HBO.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. I was like,
I definitely would have watched it if it was that easy to obtain.
HBO. Sorry. My bad. It's been a while, okay? I'm forgetting where it's coming from. Someone made it and put it on a streaming platform, okay?
It came out like right after Game of Thrones ended.
Yeah, because we were talking about how they used Game of Thrones to like piggyback, I guess. So they piggybacked off Game of Thrones, like the audience, everyone had HBO, but they were just getting it for Game of Thrones, then deleting their subscription.
The trial period, right?
Yeah. Well, right. Not a trial. You can get like a 1 month subscription, I think.
Oh, okay.
And so they're just like getting a short one rather than extending it. And so they released it right as the last couple episodes of Game of Thrones was ending. And people really loved it. And so it kind of took off this summer. And so I watched it probably almost about a month ago now. But I loved it. It was so good. I didn't know a whole lot about Chernobyl other than like the basics. Most people
really don't know most anything about Chernobyl.
You know, it was a power plant that exploded, at least.
I do.
Okay.
Because of your notes.
All right. Great. Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and go into that. It's a 5-episode show. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. It is probably a mature audience, I would say, for language. And then there is one episode that has non-sexual nudity a little bit as well. So probably for adults on that one, but very, very good. So episode 1 starts out in Moscow, April 26th, 1988. And dates in this are really, really important, and times, because the full first 3 episodes are all happening in the course of a day or two. It's all happening just really, really fast.
Right. Well, when's it end? Just what's the span of the show?
So after that, it kind of jumps a little bit. So I think it all takes place within 2 years, if I remember right. Yeah, 2 years and 1 minute.
Okay.
Is Great. The total time frame.
Okay.
But 3 episodes all happen within the course of a couple days.
Yeah, got it.
So we open up with a voice, and I'll read the quote in a second, but we later learn that this is one of our main characters. His name is Professor Legasov, okay? And I'm probably going to butcher some of these Russian names, and I'm sorry. Hopefully none of our Russian listeners are offended.
So Chernobyl is in Russia.
Chernobyl is in Ukraine, which at the time was USSR.
Okay, yeah. City of Pripyat? Did I say that? Do you know?
They said it in the show, but...
Pripyat?
I don't remember.
In the north of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we later learn who it is, but at the time we don't know. And so he's saying, what is the cost of lies? It's not that we will mistake them for truths. The real danger is that if we hear enough lies, we no longer recognize the truth at all. What can we do then? What else is left but to abandon the hope of truth and content ourselves instead with stories? In these stories, it doesn't matter who the heroes are. All that matters is who is to blame. In this story, it was Anatoly Dyatlov. He was the best choice. He ran the room that night. He gave the orders. And no friends, at least not important ones. And now Dyatlov will spend the next 10 years in prison in labor camp. Of course, that sentence is doubly unfair. There were far greater criminals than him at work. And as far as what Dyatlov did, the man doesn't deserve prison. He deserves death. And then a little bit later on, he says, all that matters is justice was done. Because to them, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl. What happened there, what happened after what good we did, all of it, madness. And so we see what he's doing is he's recording 6 tapes of essentially his story of what happened at Chernobyl. And then he secretly sneaks out of his apartment and walks down like a dark alley with them, pretends he's taking out the trash. But in reality, he hides those 6 tapes in a secret like hole in the wall of the building. And then he goes back up to his apartment. And you can see that there's people watching him from the street. He's definitely being spied on by someone.
Okay.
And later we learn that it's essentially the USSR Secret Service. But when he goes back up to his apartment, he commits suicide. And then we have a flashback 2 years and 1 minute earlier.
So already you can just guess that there's something greater going on than just an accidental explosion.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and just dive into this quote a little bit. I think some of there's not a whole lot you can go into because you don't know the story yet, but do you have any thoughts on kind of what he's saying, especially in that first quote, I guess?
Well, actually what comes to mind, just because I guess I was in the movie theater yesterday, so I saw a bunch of trailers. Have you seen the trailer for Dark Water with the guy that plays Bruce Banner?
No.
It's a new movie coming out. It's not out yet, but I think it's coming out in the next month or two.
Dark Water.
And
okay.
It's about the water plant like up in one of the Dakotas. It was a big deal that was poisoning the town it was in.
Okay.
And lying about it for 40 years.
Oh, for real?
And he was a lawyer for big companies like that. And then like a friend of his like, hey, can you just come look at my farm? And the farmer lost 40 cows overnight. And he's like, that's not a mistake. Like, that's not a disease. And so he's showing him the water, and then he's starts like researching it. And the more he researches it, the more he's like, what the heck is going on here? And so that's just what this quote made me think of, because I feel like the show is kind of like the same thing. People are like hiding something. People are like shady, and it's been going on probably longer than just right before Chernobyl blew up. Mm. But just so in this one sense, the first question, that's the only thing. If we take what are the cost of lies? Mm-hmm. And so for Dark Water, the cost for the businessman is profit, is money, but the cost for that profit is possibly a town of small folks and kids, and local farmers might die of early age or get cancer. Mm-hmm. For this, I don't know what else was going on, but the cost ultimately was massive death. What were they gaining? Probably the same thing: profit, money, some kind of power.
We'll get to it.
But it's the business thing of trade-offs, and we do that as customers, where you're choosing what you sacrifice for to obtain something.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a few dollars, like do I want to lose $20, or do I want to only pay $5 for something?
Risk and reward. Whereas the risk here is like losing lives or losing cows, right?
But in a larger sense, kind of what we do, the cost of lying is also salvation. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think especially what he's trying to get at here too is that it's not even just that. Well, his kind of assumption is that he's saying it's not that we're going to think those things are true. That's not the cost. The cost, according to him, is that we become so numb to lies that we don't even recognize what is true at all anymore. We just are so saturated with these falsities that we can't even recognize any truth, which also, like, that claim makes sense, right? Because if, like, Christ claims to be the truth and we no longer recognize what truth is, then whatever these falsities are keeping us from that and recognizing him. And it goes on to say then that we become so obsessed with stories instead, which I want to point out is not the same thing of what we're talking about, because we talk about stories on here all the time.
Right.
But what he's talking about is the corruption of stories being used to cover up truth rather than to reveal truth.
Right.
And so he's talking about these fake stories that are invented to cover up what is actually happening, where the heroes are actually not glorified, where the heroes are not recognized. And that's kind of the opposite of what we talk about on the show. So anything else for that first kind of scene?
No, I mean, it made me think of this past Sunday's reading, the gospel of the dishonest
steward.
worker. Yeah, the steward.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get into that because the whole gospel is really too confusing for me anyways. And
maybe another time.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I said, after that scene, we go back 2 years and 1 minute. And it's 1:30 a.m. on April 26th, 1986. Okay, so we see that they're in some kind of control room and a fire starts at a nuclear plant, Chernobyl. One of the workers says that the nuclear core exploded, and the others say that it's impossible. And so they keep going on as if it's just some kind of fire in some tank. I don't know all the details, so sorry, I'm not a nuclear physicist. But basically, they just call in the firefighters from the nearby town, the one that you just mentioned before that I can't pronounce. And they call in both the civilian and military firefighters. So it's basically, they're saying it's a big deal, but it's just like it's a fire.
Right.
So they bring everyone in, and they do test for radiation, and it's too high to measure on the like practice devices that they have. And they don't notice this. The people that I was just mentioning don't notice all this stuff happening, but people's skin start to burn, and you see them vomiting blood. This is more of like in the facility itself, or the firefighters. Eventually, you see this happening to them too. And the scientists in the control room keep saying over and over again, we did everything right. We did everything right. The entire series, these guys are saying that. And one of them, actually a couple times, people say, do you taste metal? And that's because there's sulfur like in the air, and they can taste it.
Okay.
Which comes up later. So we're kind of flashing back and forth between these two scenes, the firemen and the people in the control room.
Got it.
And so back with the firemen again, one of the firemen picks up a stone from the blast. He's wearing like these big, heavy, like fireman gloves. And within a few minutes, it has burned through the glove, and his skin, even though he just picks it up and sets it back down, burns through and like destroys the glove, and his skin starts to melt off. And anytime they touch that stone, the same thing happens. And so they start staying away from it. Going back to the control room, we learned that the person in charge of the control room was Dyatlov, the guy that we had just heard about in that quote before. And he calls in the day shift employees to kind of like compensate for the issues that are going on, so they have more workers. But in reality, he's endangering an entirely new shift of people unknowingly, or possibly knowingly. So then it flashes forward to 2:30. The directors of the entire plant show up, and the man in charge of the control room, Dyatlov, gives the other guys, whose names I didn't get, an update. But he says what he thinks happened and completely ignores all the facts that they've seen up to this point. And he says, it's not that big of a deal. We completely have it under control, even though they haven't done anything to actually control it.
Right.
He's just saying, just a little fire, everything's fine. And people keep telling him, and his scientists keep telling him that there's radiation, but they keep saying it's not that bad. But in actuality, what's happening is it's off the charts for every like tool that they bring in to measure it.
Read it.
They can't read it. And so their charts are saying that it's essentially, it's not that dangerous. Like, it's not good, but it's not dangerous. We've had worse, kind of thing. And they really just don't know how bad it is. So I don't know how to explain the numbers, but so their machines max out at 3.6, whatever the units are that they measure it with. Later on, I'll tell you what the actual numbers are. But so right now they're saying it's only 3.6. It's not that bad. Ash from this fire reaches the city miles away, as the citizens and even children are like standing outside watching it like it's fireworks from the 4th of July. And later on, at the very end of the show, we find out that every single person who is standing at that, like, there's like a bridge miles away, every single person that was standing there died, even though it was miles and miles away. So they thought it was just something to watch. And they were celebrating. It literally looked like a 4th of July festival for them. So flash forward another hour, 3:30, those extra workers arrive, the ones Dyatlov called in from the day shift. So now we have the night shift workers, at least what's left of them, the ones that haven't died, and the day shift workers are there. Flash forward again, 5:20. The leaders and the directors meet with a like big committee, and one of them says that the directors are keeping information about how dangerous it really is and they need to evacuate the city immediately. And so we see for the first time, like, one of the people in charge actually speaks up and, like, wants something to be done. And immediately, the oldest, and clearly, like, when he starts talking, you know that he's very, very respected by everyone else. He stands up and he says, "Sometimes we fall prey to fear. Our faith in Soviet socialism will always be rewarded. The state tells us the situation is not dangerous. Have faith, comrades. The state tells us they want to prevent a panic. Listen well. It's true. When people see the police, they will be afraid. But it is my experience that when people ask questions that are not in their best interest, they should simply be told to keep their minds on their own labor and leave matters of the state to the state. We seal off the city. No one leaves. And we cut the phone lines to prevent the spread of misinformation. That is how we keep the people from undermining the fruits of their own labor. Yes, comrades, we will be rewarded for what we do tonight. This is our moment to shine." So, without looking too much into my notes, what are your thoughts on that?
Is he saying that they want to kind of wall it off in order to not cause panic to the cities outside of that?
No, so he's saying that, well, so the first guy is saying that this is worse than it sounds,
right,
and we need to get people out of here because if we don't, they're going to die. This guy is saying if we let people out, then it's going to seem like a bigger deal than it actually is, according to them, and it's going to look like we failed, and we can't do that. And so we need to contain it, and we need to control it here, and then we'll be rewarded. Because if it gets out, then that makes the USSR look weak.
Right.
Right? And so it's all about, like, keeping face, even at the risk of lives, essentially.
I mean, it just sounds like it goes back to the first quote. Like, they're not quite lying because I almost feel like they believe it, but they're strategically making actions in order to be able to control the people, like crowd control.
Yeah.
And once again, for profit, for some type of, like you said, we will be rewarded in the end.
For sure.
For doing this.
Yeah, and I had that in mind too. It's very prideful in that way, I think.
Right.
And also it's placing blind faith in men, right? It's saying we need to just trust. We shouldn't question anything. The state knows what's best. And that's ridiculous. Like, how many times, like, we all make mistakes, right? If we just blindly trusted in someone because they were a person in authority, like, that's awful. Like, if something is unjust, then we have the responsibility to, like, act in opposition to that, right? The other thing that I noticed in here is when he says keep their minds on their own labor, it's kind of like our phrases of mind your own business, or if you have nothing nice to say, then say nothing at all.
Right.
Which, looking back, has been so detrimental to society because that has kind of bred the mindset of you can't ever say anything bad about anyone. You can't ever call anyone out. You can't have any, like, fraternal correction because that would be offensive or wrong. And that's dangerous because then we just all assume that we're right.
Right.
But we can't all be right all the time. And it's just a really, really dangerous thing for society. And it's helpful to have fraternal correction, to have someone who can say to us healthily, and this is a relationship that you and I have, where we try to call each other out when we're messing up and call each other to do something different.
I think it also makes it hard, like, now when someone wants to, like, add criticism or call someone out and people take it in the wrong way as, like, complaining or as negative comments. When it's not negative, it's just like it's healthy criticism and a healthy way to, like, call someone into more holiness. But just because of the culture and because of, like you said, if you have nothing nice to say and, like, live, like, just that seed being planted.
Yeah, just keep to yourself.
The people that are used to that way are like, well, why are you being mean to me? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I want to take away from this paragraph is they try to stop the spread of information. They literally cut the phone lines. Anytime you try to stop communication because you don't want people to know what's going on, people know that's shady. Can you imagine if the U.S. government tried to do that? There would be a riot. And I think the same thing goes for like Satan too. Like, what does he try to do? He tries to stop communication between us, because when we don't communicate, then we can feel isolated,
right?
And it's easier to attack us when we're isolated.
Yes.
And so I think we also see kind of that spiritual warfare kind of thing going on there too.
Just isolate everyone so they don't know what's going on, but then they aren't worried.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the lead engineer reports back to these directors, not the whole council, but just the main directors of the facility. And they brought in a new machine and they tried measuring the radiation. And this one goes up to 1,000. And as soon as they tried to measure it, it broke immediately. And so they assumed, oh, it's just a faulty machine. In reality, it's because it was over 1,000.
Right.
And so they used one that went up to 200. And that one maxed out. So they're like, oh, well, maybe it's worse than we thought, but it's still not that bad. It's only 200. And they keep saying stuff like that. And the directors themselves actually don't even believe that, like, he's telling the truth. He's like, it's not possible for it to go up to 200. They keep saying it's not possible. Like, you're just wrong. That's like, I'm a scientist. I know this. You're wrong. And the guy's just like, okay. And he tries to explain that, like, he literally personally walked around the building and found graphite. And that was the rock that the firemen were holding. And he explains, and this is where we learn, the only place where there's graphite in the entire place is at the core of the facility, the nuclear core. So Dyatlov just outright says, you're lying. That's not possible. It's literally not possible. And they keep denying it. And then immediately, as Dyatlov is saying that's not true, he starts to vomit blood. And this is inside the bunker with the rest of the leaders. So they're in like a secure bunker. They force the engineer to go to the roof and look down into the reactor to see what's actually down there, basically to prove him wrong. And he does. And they go up there, and he knows that, like, it's going to kill him if he does it, but they force him to go. And then we see the two engineers who were in charge of the controls they go into the building itself, because there's water valves in there, and they're trying to, like, balance out some of the water pressure or something like that. I'm not going to go into the details on it, but in that moment, one of them says, maybe we did do something wrong. And that's the first time that they admit it. So that's episode 1. I'm going to keep going because I don't know what time is, and I feel like we're going kind of long. Episode 2, 8:30 a.m., over 400 kilometers away, there's an institute that's in charge of, like, nuclear anything for the USSR. And it starts picking up really high levels of radiation. This is 400 kilometers away. And they call Chernobyl, but nobody answers. And so they start calling around, and they start seeing if there's something going on here. Doctors don't know what to do with the burns. And one of the nurses kind of, like, helps them out. And the man that we saw from the beginning, this is where he comes in. His name is Professor Valery Legasov. And he's summoned to a meeting with a bunch of high-ranking officials because he's an expert on nuclear reactors, essentially. And so they discuss a report from Chernobyl.
Right.
And as he's going through, he's like, no, like, if this is true, then things are
not okay.
Not okay. Like, it's way worse than they're making it out to be, and it's even way worse than what this other guy in episode 1 was saying. It's actually probably the worst thing that's, like, ever happened in the history of the world, essentially, is what Legasov is trying to tell people. So he points out that the graphite in the number 3.6 from the radiation reading and says that it's not actually 3.6, that's just what it maxed out at. So this is for the first time they're realizing how bad it is. And he says even that is equivalent to 400 X-rays of radiation happening at once. So even 3.6 is extremely dangerous, which the other guys were denying. The head of the committee says, I don't hear facts at all. All I hear is a man I don't know engaging in conjecture in direct contradiction to what has been reported by the party officials. And so again, we see, like, this denial of the truth. They're afraid of the truth. They keep denying everything, even when they're presented with facts. And so eventually Legasov calms down and convinces them to, like, let him explain how bad it is. And so he is sent with Boris Sherbina, who we did Good Will Hunting a while ago.
Yeah.
He is the professor, the same
okay.
actor.
Yeah.
So
gotcha.
This Sherbina guy, along with Legasov, are kind of some of the main characters for the rest of the show. So They meet with the Chernobyl officials, and Sherbina uses some of the information that he kind of like tricked out of Legasov on the way there, and they need to figure out like exactly what's wrong. One of the military leaders says their high-level radiation tester has just arrived, and they can put it on a lead-protected truck and drive it into the core to actually see how bad it is. Professor Legasov says like this is good, but it's too dangerous. Like anyone who does it's going to die. And that military official actually volunteers. He says, I'll do it. So he drives it in. When he comes back, he didn't actually get all the way to the core because he's in a truck, obviously. But when he comes back, the reading was 15,000, not 3.6, obviously. Right. Yep. So extremely dangerous. And Legasov says that this is over twice as much as an atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima every single hour of radiation. So serious stuff. The Chernobyl leaders are then escorted away for safety, and the professor tells Sherbina how he thinks they can put the reactor out, but Sherbina refuses to evacuate still. And so everyone's still stuck in the town. The next day, April 27th, 30 hours after the explosion, they use helicopters to start dropping stuff on the fire. It's certain, I think it's like sand. I don't remember what it was, but whatever it was like supposed to chemically like balance some of the stuff. And that day, Sweden detects radiation coming from that plant and leaks it. And then the Americans use satellites to figure out what's going on. Now the whole world knows. And so people all over Europe are being affected, and countries all over are telling their people to stay inside because they know how dangerous it is. And yet this town that's only a couple miles away is not allowed to go anywhere. And they're outside. You can see them playing in the yards.
Because they don't know anything.
Because they don't know anything. Even though the rest of the world is safe, essentially. 2 p.m. the second day. Finally, Sherbina is convinced to evacuate. So they have 50,000 civilians in this city, and they're trying to evacuate them. They have hundreds of like buses that come in, and they bring the people out. The woman from that Institute of Nuclear Activity that I mentioned before read the 400 kilometers away there was radiation. She shows up, and she explains what's happening, and that what they're dropping on the fire to put it out seems like it would work normally, but what it's going to do is actually heat things up. And because of all the water underneath from trying to put out the fire, it's actually going to cause a steam explosion. And so the way they explain it, I don't know if I have the notes here, but essentially it would blow up most of Eastern Europe, and all of Europe would be like dangerous, and no food would be edible or water drinkable for like 100+ years if they mess it up. And so essentially what they need is 3 workers who know the plant to be able to go into the water underneath this core. So they're literally going 10, 15 feet away from this nuclear core, and they need to open up like these drainage things. And so they somehow convince 3 guys to essentially commit suicide to go in and save everyone else. And they do. And that's kind of how we end the second episode, is they go in. So that's a lot of information. I want to kind of see if we can unpack some of that before we dive into season 3.
Yeah. Essentially what I'm getting from this is what happens, like you've said it a few times with the denial of truth.
Yeah.
What happens when we deny in a way where we believe, just if we turn a blind eye, if we choose not to accept this and we accept what we want to accept as truth, then eventually what we will accept as truth will become true. But that's not how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
But like that's like what's happening. They're like, look, just the longer we tell them they're wrong because they're wrong and we're right, when this will play out, then they will finally see that we're right. And then you're seeing that the repercussions of them trying to like put out small fires that are arising as they're learning, like, okay, it's a little bit worse, is only making it worse. Like we just said in the very end, like putting the sand to try to fix stuff.
It's a metaphor.
Made it even worse.
Yeah.
And the only way to actually fix this problem, and there's a few people that have been doing it, is to sacrifice yourself and almost die to yourself in order to fix it. Like those guys went in to die to save everyone else. Like,
yeah,
it's no longer about me anymore. Like the other people, it's about everybody else.
Yeah. And they actually, at one point, I think it's episode 2 or 3, will describe exactly like the slow, painful death of like how this happens. And these guys knowing that going in, oh my gosh, like you get all the feels watching this. And anyone, and he mentions this in that opening quote, I guess from the beginning of the show, the heroes are forgotten. And that's the whole point of like why they said they made this series. And yeah, it's just awesome. You really, I don't know, you really root for these guys, and just like knowing that they're gonna die.
Yeah.
And so start of episode 3, we see that they succeeded. They walked out and they're joyful. They bring them a bunch of alcohol to celebrate, and these guys, they realize they're gonna die soon, but they just saved literally almost all of Europe. And we've flashed forward a couple of days, so it's 4 days after all this went down, and now we're actually in Moscow, and we see that one of the firemen, his name is Ignatenko, he's brought there, and his wife actually bribes her way into visiting him. She's not supposed to go into the hospital because it's dangerous with the radiation and stuff, but she bribes her way in. And she's told that she cannot touch him under any circumstances because of the radiation, but she agrees, and immediately as soon as the nurse leaves, she just like starts hugging him and kissing him and stuff. And that's important, and we'll get to why. So we find out Sherbina only evacuated 30 kilometers instead of the 200 that he was told to do. And so a lot of people are still in danger. And then we start to see that the fuel rods start to melt down. That's what they were concerned about, because when the fuel rods melt down, that's when it starts to get worse again. And so it's starting to happen. A couple days later, so we're at May 2nd. This is, I think, 6 days after the actual explosion. The general secretary, who was the guy from that first like big council meeting, says to Legasov, "I don't want questions. I want to know when this will be over." And immediately after that, Legasov and Sherbina realize that they have been bugged and have been being followed. And so this is kind of just going back to that council. I don't want questions. I want to know when this will be over. Again, he's like denying any questions. He doesn't want anyone to ask. He doesn't want anyone to have information. It's all just like shut it down as soon as possible. We don't want this to get out. And it's just more of that denial, more of cover-ups. And then we find out that the physicist woman from before, her name is Ulana. So Legasov tells her that they won't be able to figure out why it exploded doing the math, because it just doesn't make sense. They've been running every possible situation and they just haven't been able to figure it out. So she needs to go to Moscow and start interviewing the men who were there. So she goes to where the people who were in the control room are now dying in a hospital, including Dyatlov and the others. So she goes there. Meanwhile, they go and get a bunch of miners from a nearby coal mine, and they say that they need to dig a hole underneath the reactor to stop the meltdown, essentially. Ignatenko, the wife, is told to keep distance from her husband, but keeps going back over and over, hugging and kissing, and this keeps coming up later on, too. Meanwhile, in the same hospital, Ulana, the physicist, visits Dyatlov in the hospital, but Dyatlov refuses to talk. He's denying everything. And then we also see, again going back to the heroes, these miners go right to work immediately. They have about 400 people come in, and they're supposed to dig 12 feet to be more safe from the radiation, but the head miner essentially says it'll be faster if we do 6. Like, knowing that they're going to get double the radiation, essentially, he's like, we have to, or else it's pointless. Yeah. So it was a time crunch, and so they do. And these miners are nuts in the most respectful way possible. We flash forward to 9 days after. The miners say it's 122 degrees Fahrenheit in the tunnel, but the officials refuse to give them any fans or anything, because if they do, it'll start kicking up radiation. And so they do it naked. They mine naked, day and night, nonstop this whole time. And this is earlier when I was talking about the one scene. We flash over to Ulana, and she visits the engineers from the control room, specifically the one who said that maybe something did go wrong at the beginning of the show. And we find out he was only 25, and he was the senior engineer for the whole plant. They move Ignatenko, and the nurse who told his wife not to touch him tells her she needs to leave, but she won't. So she says to just stay behind this like plastic coating. And immediately, again, as soon as the nurse leaves, she goes in and like lays on the cot with him, even though his skin is literally like melting off. It's crazy. So Ulana is interviewing this engineer who says that there was a spike in power. So they initiated a shutdown, causing the explosion. The other engineer pressed the button, causing the explosion. So she goes to him to interview, and he keeps saying the same thing at the beginning. I did everything right. I did everything right, over and over again. And they're just denying that anything went wrong. And then she catches Ignatenko and calls her out, and calls out the nurse. And as she's doing so, the KGB come in and arrest her. Are you following so far? I know this is a lot of stuff. Okay. May 7th, back in Moscow. So they're back with the big committee meeting again. This is Sherbina and Legasov. They tell the council that thousands of kilometers will need to be evacuated. All animals will need to be killed. Forests will need to be burned. And at least 100 kilometers squared of land will need to be dug up and burned. And there will need to be some kind of containment structure put over the core to stabilize it. And this is kind of like we've stopped the immediate situation, but now the aftermath is hitting. So they start recruiting about 750,000 men, and they say it's going to take several years for this to finish, okay? Legasov talks to the KGB director and gets Ulana released, and she tells them what she learned. And then we see that Ignatenko and the other firemen die, and they're buried in metal coffins below cement. And that's where we end episode 3. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of lies, a lot of cover-ups, a lot of denial of the truth. And it wasn't until people started coming in, because originally Sherbina was anti any of this. He didn't believe any of it. He was totally on board with the state. He was an up-and-coming kind of like politician. And so it was all about like agree with who you need to agree with. But when he got there, he was like, no, like this needs to be done. And it took time for Legasov to kind of work on him. But once we get to episode 3, we start to see that shift. And so I kind of just want your final thoughts on this. We'll go into the other episodes in part 2 of this series.
Well, I think what's most interesting that we haven't touched on really, I mean, it's still kind of all the same, like you said, lies as well as just denial as well as truth. But the one guy that, or even the few people that are just like, I did everything right.
Mm-hmm.
I did everything right. And I think like there are moments where we are moving along, we are walking in our faith journey, and in our sights, our earthly vision, we're doing everything right.
Mm-hmm.
And then we like look back, like turn around, and you just see like a lot of mistakes.
The aftermath, yeah.
Yeah, it's like living a life without a daily examine. If you're going when you're not like examining where you missed God, where you like, because what's it called when you don't sin from action, but a sin of omission?
Yeah, sin of omission.
That's a thing too.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're just doing everything right, but it's also you're not missing opportunities to live and to reach or to keep your eyes on truth.
Mm-hmm.
On Christ. And the other thing was when he said no questions, I just want to know this will end. And it made me think of like cutting the phone lines. And it's like another aspect of this is like, I'm a really big component of asking questions. Mm-hmm. Like you ask questions, you will find truth.
Exactly.
And that's another reason of not only miscommunication, but just if someone in the town just asked a question and then called someone up and they asked a question, the more they started to like search, they would find like, oh, there's something going on, and the people in the town could probably figure out something's really not good even before these people that know it's not good or denying it would tell them. So like asking questions is huge. When he's like, I don't want questions, and it's like everyone here is just totally not really a Satan figure, but like just in these ways that we can see Satan
totally
works.
Corrupted characters. Yeah, for sure. So since we have, we're going to do a 2-part here, and we'll cover the rest of the show on the second one. Let's talk about challenges for this one. I think it's kind of interesting since most of it has to do with lies and truth. I haven't really fleshed this out much, but I'm thinking for one of the challenges to think on your life and find what lie you've been keeping in. I think we all have lies in some capacity. And if it's something that needs to come forward, and most likely it is, who do you need to reveal that to? Maybe you've been keeping something from a family member or a spouse, or maybe for people our age, maybe it's like something that you've been holding in from your parents. That's kind of like a deep residual like hurt. Maybe it's something you need to go to confession about, stuff like that. But whatever it is, recognize like what are you keeping down that you need healing with, and go find the person you need to talk to about that and do that. And that's a big challenge. And I realize that. And I just challenge you guys to recognize that and to act on it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
I was thinking kind of just sitting with kind of in that same time of reflecting and kind of seeing if there's anything in your life that you notice, you're not going to notice it yourself, but like maybe from other people that might just, what do you do, or what's something just that's a part of who you are that might like negatively affect other people. I was listening to a certain podcast talking about something that made me think of that. And it's just, even like I said, even if you're blind to you're not doing anything wrong. If you kind of have seen in small ways that it's negatively affecting other people, just sitting with like, well, why does it affect these people? Like, what is it? Is it something that I need to recognize and work with? Or is it more of like other, like something like a conversation needs to happen, and like people are like, or one person is like misunderstanding or something. But that was just kind of what came to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe just throwing out a third one. You guys don't have to do all these, maybe choose one or two. Find a way to stand for truth this week. You know, if there's something that comes up, or if there's something that you've just been like kind of letting happen and not standing up, find a way to stand up for that. And it might cause you to like those 3 guys who had to wade into the water knowing it would kill them. Maybe it's going to cause you to sacrifice in a way, but stand for truth, and whatever that looks like. With that, do you have any shout outs for this week?
Any shout outs?
Any at all?
I don't think I do have any shout outs.
Okay. I want to give a shout out to a couple people who have just been helping me in all the chaos this week. So especially my coworkers, David and Annie, especially, who have been helping me through a lot of the crazy stuff going on, and then you for all the prayer support too. So shout out to Gordon. You haven't gotten a shout out in a long time since you've been on the show. So yeah, just shout out to everyone who's been there for me this week, because it's been crazy.
Cool. Otherwise, you guys know where to find us. We have a Facebook, The Christ and Culture. We have a Twitter, @OnTheAdventure. We have a website, thechristandculture.com, which you can get to the social media that way. It has blogs. It has some videos.
All of our episodes.
All of our episodes, as well as a tab for support, which if this is, if you like what we do and you kind of feel it on your heart that you want to help benefit this, because it'll just help kind of make this more perfect. And for you, we can get better equipment. We can just do it in more of a way where this can reach so many more people and with better quality. That is a Patreon. So Patreon.com/thechristandculture.com. I'm actually editing a podcast right now that'll go out to the first 5 patrons. And right now we have 3. So there's still 2 more slots for that. If you would like 2 bonus episodes right now, ultimately 5, that only 5 people can get, support our podcast. Yeah. And with that, thank you guys for joining us on the adventure, and we will finish this next time.
Bye.